Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something, well, kind of mind-bending. Time.
Oh, yeah. Time. One of those things we all think we understand. But the more you dig into it, the less straightforward it becomes.
Exactly.
Right.
And I mean, have you ever felt like time just vanishes some days?
Yeah.
Or like it was just drags on forever?
All the time.
Well, turns out those aren't just feelings, they're actual distortions our brains create.
Yeah, our brains can play some pretty interesting tricks on us when it comes to time.
It's true. We've got this really cool Vsauce video that breaks down all these different temporal illusions.
Temporal illusions.
Yeah, basically, optical illusions, but for time.
Oh, I like where this is going.
So,
Great.
are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. So the video starts off with this thing called the holiday paradox. Have you ever noticed how, being stuck at the airport, waiting for a delayed flight, feels like forever in the moment?
Oh, yes. The worst.
But then later on, it's barely even a memory.
Yeah, it's like it never even happened.
But then on the flip side, you have that amazing day, sightseeing or something. It feels so short while you're living it. But when you look back, the memories feel like they lasted forever.
It is kind of weird when you think about it.
It's a total paradox.
So how does the video explain this?
Well, it talks about full versus empty activity.
Full versus empty.
Yeah. So when you're doing something full, like something engaging, your attention is totally absorbed.
Okay, so you're not really thinking about the clock.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you're stuck in an empty activity, like
Yeah.
waiting in line or something, you become super aware of every minute passing by.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like when you're bored. Time just crawls.
It's totally true. And this reminds me of that time I did that 3-day isolation experiment.
Oh, yeah. You talked about that before.
During those 3 days, I was constantly checking the clock, and it felt like time was moving so slowly. But looking back, it feels like those 3 days barely even happened.
Because there wasn't much happening. So your memory kind of compressed those 3 days.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about the actual length of time. It's also about how much our attention is focused on it and how many memories we're creating during that time.
Right. It's like our brains are always trying to find ways to simplify things, even time.
Okay. So that's the holiday paradox. But what about the feeling that time itself speeds up as we get older? Didn't childhood feel like it lasted forever?
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like the years just fly by now.
I know. So what's the deal with that?
Well, there's this theory called the proportion theory that tries to explain it.
Oh, portion theory.
Yeah. Basically, every year that passes represents a smaller and smaller percentage of your overall life.
Oh, okay.
So like for a 5-year-old, 1 year is a huge 20% of their whole life.
Wow.
But for someone in their 40s, 1 year is only about 2.5% of their
I
life.
see. It's like those pie charts where the slices get thinner as the pie gets bigger. But here's the thing. Studies have shown that older people don't actually perceive weeks, months, or even years as passing faster. It's decades that seem to shrink for them.
So it's not just about getting older then?
There's got to be something else going on.
Right.
What does the video say?
Well, the video suggests it might be tied to new experiences.
New experiences.
Yeah. As we age, we tend to settle into routines. We have fewer brand new experiences. So we create fewer distinct memories.
Oh.
And that could be why decades end up feeling more compressed in our memories.
It's like my isolation experiment all over again.
Exactly.
Because so little happened during that time. There weren't many unique memories for me to latch onto.
Right. So it seems like the richness and novelty of our experiences play a huge role in how we experience time passing.
Maybe the key to feeling like time is moving a little slower is to shake things up and create more new memories.
It's worth a shot.
Okay, so next up, the video gets into these things called chronological illusions, and this is where things start to get kind of trippy. Yeah. These illusions show how our concepts of time can actually mess with the actual order and length of events.
Whoa. Wait. So you're saying our brains can actually rewrite history?
Not intentionally, of course, but our brains love to categorize and conceptualize things, and sometimes those mental shortcuts can lead to some pretty big distortions.
Okay. I definitely need some examples here.
Okay, how about this? Think about those classic debates online. Is a hot dog a sandwich? Is cereal a soup?
Oh, man. Those are surprisingly tough questions.
I know, right?
It's like, there's no easy answer.
Exactly, and that's because those debates aren't about some objective truth. They're about the words and mental categories we use to organize the world.
So our brains are trying to make sense of things.
Right. And those categories can influence how we experience time.
Okay, but how does that apply to, like, actual historical events?
Well, think about how we talk about decades. When did the 80s really happen?
I mean, it's not like everyone woke up on January 1st, 1980 and was like, time to start wearing neon and leg warmers.
Exactly. It's fuzzy. It's determined more by trends and our collective memory than any clear start and end date.
And that fuzziness can cause illusions.
It can. Like what?
Marilyn Monroe and Queen Elizabeth were both born in the same year.
What? Seriously?
Yep.
My brain always pictures Marilyn Monroe as being from way earlier than Queen Elizabeth.
I know, right? It's because our mental images of them are so different. Marilyn represents old Hollywood, black and white photos, while we associate Queen Elizabeth with modern-day England, color photos, the whole deal.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Those contrasting images
Yeah.
make us perceive them as belonging to very different time periods, even though they were alive at the same time.
What you're saying is the more different two things seem, the further apart in time our brains assume they are.
Exactly. It's called the conceptual comparison heuristic.
The what now?
The conceptual comparison heuristic. Basically, our brains judge how far apart things are in time, based on how different our mental images of those things are.
Oh, okay. I think I get it. So, our brains are taking these mental shortcuts, trying to make sense of time, but those shortcuts can lead to these illusions.
It's like our brains are always trying to simplify things.
And that's not always a good thing.
Nope.
Okay, so we've got the holiday paradox, we've got these chronological illusions. Anything else?
There's actually another heuristic to talk about. It's called the construal level heuristic.
The what?
Construal level heuristic.
Okay.
This one has to do with whether we're thinking about something concretely or abstractly.
Concretely versus abstractly.
Yeah, so think of it like this. The more abstract our thinking, the further away something feels in time.
Okay.
So if you're thinking about Marilyn Monroe in a very abstract way, like
Yeah.
iconic Hollywood star, she might feel further away in time than if you're thinking about specific details of her life, like what she had for breakfast one morning.
So it's all about how we're framing things in our mind.
Exactly. So we've got the holiday paradox, we've got these chronological illusions. What's standing out to you so far?
Honestly, it's a little unsettling to think about how subjective my perception of history really is. I think I need to learn even more, just to get a more accurate view of the past.
It is a lot to take in.
So, are there even more of these temporal illusions?
Oh, yeah. There are a bunch more that the video dives into.
I am ready. Let's keep going.
All right, let's do it. All right, so we've talked about how our memories and like the way we categorize things can really warp our sense of time. But get this, even though we know logically that time is constantly moving forward, we often feel like our own place in time is stable. It's like we're standing still, even as everything around us changes.
Yeah, that Aya kind of mind-bending when you think about it. How can we feel stable when literally everything's in flux?
It's called the chronostatic illusion. And here's a great example from the video. Jurassic Park, Forrest Gump, and The Lion King. All came out closer to the moon landing than they are to the tip.
Wait, are you serious?
Totally serious.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Whoa. Okay. My brain is officially glitching. I remember seeing The Lion King in theaters like it was yesterday. But the moon landing feels like it happened in ancient history.
I know, right? That's the chronostatic illusion at work. Our concepts of specific periods, like the 90s in this case, tend to stay pretty fixed in our minds. And because we still engage with things like The Lion King, we watch it, we talk about it, we might even show it to our kids. It keeps feeling closer to us in time.
So you're saying it's almost like our mental timelines get a little stuck?
Exactly. The video even calls it chronostatic cling. Our brains have these mechanisms for putting things in order on our timeline, but those mechanisms can cling to certain anchor points even as time marches on.
I see. So it's like our brains are constantly trying to make time simpler, easier to grasp. But those shortcuts can lead to all these strange distortions.
And those distortions can have a really profound impact on how we see ourselves and our place in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, what about that moment when you realize you're now the same age as your parent was at a significant point in your life?
Oh, man. I remember when that happened to me. It was like this weird time warp. My parents didn't seem quite so old and all-knowing anymore.
Right. It really challenges that idea that our parents are from a completely different time than us.
The video calls this moment Chronosonder. It's this realization that our parents were once just like us, navigating the complexities of life.
Okay, that's deep. So what about the chronocentric illusion? What's that all about?
Chronocentric illusion is basically the belief that our relationship to time is the only valid one. It's like we're the main characters, and everyone else is just living in our story.
It's like main character syndrome. But for time.
Exactly. And it can lead to some interesting misconceptions. Like
Mm.
when I was a kid, I remember my grandparents talking about a time when there was no TV.
Yeah. It's like, what do people even deal all day?
I know, right? It seemed crazy to me at the time, but now I'm the one telling my kids about a time before the internet. And to them, it probably sounds just as bizarre.
It's true. It's like we all think the world started with us.
That's exactly what the video calls it. Ab ovo syndrome. The idea that everything that came before us was just the prologue, and everything after us is the epilogue.
But of course, that's not how it works at all.
No.
Everyone has their own unique story, their own place in the grand timeline of things.
And that's the essence of Chronosonder, acknowledging that everyone, even people from the past, had full, complex lives, hopes and dreams and fears, just like us.
So they weren't just figures in a history book. They were real people.
Exactly.
But I imagine it's not always easy to break free from that chronocentric illusion.
You're right. It can be easy to fall into that trap of thinking that people from the past were somehow less real or less complex than we are today.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that a lot of the historical evidence we see, old photos, grainy film footage, it all makes the past seem so distant and unreal.
It's true. But there are some types of evidence that can actually bridge that gap and make the past feel more relatable and human.
Oh, like what?
Well, the video talks about things like home videos, like that old 7-Eleven security footage from the 80s. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic.
It's so fascinating because it just shows everyday life in the past, not some big historical event, just ordinary people going about their day.
And there's something so universal about that.
Exactly. It's a reminder that people back then weren't all that different from us. They were just living their lives, grabbing snacks, hanging out.
It's like we're getting a glimpse into their world.
And it's not just home videos. Even something as simple as a photograph can challenge our chronocentric biases.
Really? How so?
Well, think about how people rarely smiled in old photographs.
Oh, yeah, they always look so serious.
Right. It was partially because of the long exposure times back then, but also because it wasn't really considered proper to smile for portraits.
Ah, interesting.
But every once in a while, you'll come across a photo from the 1800s or early 1900s of someone genuinely smiling, and it just throws everyone off. People will debate whether the photo is real or not, because it goes against our expectations of what people from the past should look like.
I've seen those. It's like they're breaking the fourth wall or something.
Right. It's a great example of how a single image can really shatter those chronocentric assumptions and make the past feel more immediate, more human.
Okay, so we've got home videos, unconventional photos. What else can help us break free from that chronocentric illusion?
Well, early high-definition footage.
Oh, wow.
There's some incredible footage of New York City from 1993, and it looks surprisingly modern.
So it's like we're seeing the past in high def for the first time.
Right. It challenges our preconceived notions of what the past actually looked and felt like. It makes it feel less foreign, less other.
It's amazing how technology can change our perspective on things.
It really is.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about how our memories, how we categorize things, and even the types of evidence we're exposed to can all shape our perception of time.
It's like time is this slippery concept
Uh,
that we're always trying to grasp.
and our brains are always trying to find shortcuts to make it all make sense.
But what else does the video have to say about how our understanding of time has evolved over, well, time?
It's a good question. And it actually brings up a really interesting point about time travel.
Time travel.
Yeah, the video points out that the whole idea of time travel is actually relatively new. It didn't really become a common theme in fiction until the 19th century.
Really? Why not? I mean,
Yeah.
you'd think people would have always fantasized about traveling through time.
You would think so, right? But it's because the pace of change wasn't as fast back then. The past didn't feel as drastically different from the present.
So it wasn't as much of a foreign
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as technology advanced and society began changing at a faster and faster rate, the past started to feel more and more distinct.
And that's when the idea of time travel really took off.
Exactly. The more different the past feels, the more we're fascinated by the idea of visiting it.
I guess that makes sense.
And that fascination with time travel, is really a reflection of a larger shift in how we understand history. We went from seeing the past as a continuation of the present to viewing it as a separate era with its own unique characteristics.
But hasn't that shift also created a lot of anxiety for us? I mean, don't we
Yeah.
feel this constant pressure to keep up with the ever-accelerating pace of change?
Absolutely. We live in a world where things are evolving at an incredible speed, and it's easy to feel like we're falling behind if we don't stay on top of every new trend, every new technology.
And it's like, oh, you're always trying to save time. We invent all these things to make life easier and faster, but then those very inventions create all these new demands on our time.
That's one of the key points the video
There's
makes.
a paradox.
It is. Like, we invented cars to get places faster, but now we have longer commutes and more sprawling cities.
And then there's smartphones, the internet. They were supposed to help us connect and access information more easily. But now we have information overload, new kinds of social pressures.
Exactly. It's like we're constantly trying to outsmart time, but it always seems to catch up with us.
Yeah, and then there's the whole thing with binge watching. It feels good in the moment, but then you look back and you're like, where did all that time go?
Right. The video calls this the short pattern. Experiences that feel short, both during AD, after.
It's like you're just burning through time.
Exactly. And the video argues that this pattern is often linked to a kind of stimulation without connection.
Oh, interesting.
Binge watching can be very stimulating,
Hmm.
but it often lacks those deeper connections that come from engaging with things at a more personal level.
So maybe the antidote is to be more intentional with how we choose to spend our time and to focus on things that truly resonate with us.
I think that's a great takeaway. It's about finding those experiences that feel both full and meaningful, experiences that we can look back on with a sense of satisfaction.
Yeah, it's about quality over quantity.
Yeah, it really is all about making the most of the time we have. We've explored all these fascinating ways that our brains can play tricks on us when it comes to time. But I guess what I'm really curious about is how can we actually use this knowledge to live better, more fulfilling lives? What's the big takeaway here?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the key takeaway from all these temporal illusions is that we're living in a really unique moment in history. The rapid pace of change is actually reshaping our whole relationship with time itself.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly trying to outsmart time, make everything faster and more efficient, but maybe in doing so, we're losing something important.
Maybe we are.
Yeah.
Maybe we're sacrificing that feeling of being truly present in the moment.
You know, it's making me think about how obsessed we've become with documenting everything these days. Photos, videos, social media posts. It's like we're trying to capture every fleeting moment.
That's interesting. What do you think is driving that impulse? I don't know, but I wonder if it has something to do with this feeling that time is slipping away from us. It's like by capturing these moments, we're trying to make them more real, more lasting.
That's a really interesting thought. Maybe by documenting our experiences, we're creating a sense of fullness, even in a world that can feel fragmented and overwhelmingly fast-paced.
It's definitely something to think about. This whole deep dive has given me so much to ponder about my own relationship with time.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that time is both precious and fleeting. And even though we can't control time itself, we can definitely make choices about how we spend the time we have.
Absolutely. So, to everyone listening out there, what are your takeaways from this deep dive? Have you noticed these time illusions at play in your own life? What strategies do you use to feel more present and make the most of your time?
The more we understand about how our brains perceive time, the better equipped we are to shape our own experiences and live more meaningful, fulfilling lives.